Hello everyone, I'm back today with another video. This is going to be a recording of my round 5 game from the Open League tournament. My last 4 videos on my channel were the first 4 rounds of that tournament. The tournament was played mainly in fall of 2024. I think this game in particular was played either the last week of September or the first week of October. So immediately following the game that was uploaded yesterday on my channel against Pickett. After winning that game against Pickett, I moved to 4 wins and 0 losses in the tournament, which placed me at the top of my group. And then I was matched for round 5 with North Nemesis. Today I think he's just called Nemesis, who was 3-1 at the time, 3 wins, 1 loss. That loss was to Pickett, who of course I had defeated in the previous round. But Nemesis was also rated pretty highly in like the site-wide ranked game rating. He was about 500 to 550 elo, kind of fluctuating around there. I never played it before. I think this was also his first tournament, so I wasn't exactly sure what to expect. But he had a decent amount of ranked games, and kind of had been fluctuating around, that rating of 500 plus, which is similar to where I was. So I expected this to be a pretty competitive game, probably a challenge, probably a tough game, someone who I would match pretty evenly with. And I'll go ahead and get the game started here. I believe it's going to be on 2 times speed. I'll go ahead and just keep that for there because it's a pretty long game. You can see it's about 50 minutes. But the setup I opted for here is pretty standard, nothing crazy. It's a bit of a variation on a setup that I used to play a long time ago, somewhat consistently, probably in the old Stratego.com era, like 2020, 2019, around there. The high bombs here kind of being the distinguishing factor. I advanced early here on the right side. I don't think that's actually the best idea because this setup is not really well constructed for any sort of aggression on this side. All I have is a major, and that's it, and there's nothing to back up the major. And you can see pretty immediately there, I take that captain with my major. His colonel takes out my major, so I have info, that's great. But then I have nothing really to do on the right side at all. I'm kind of at a standstill already, and I don't want to bury or unbury this side too much. I don't want to like excavate the side too much because then the bombs will become exposed, and that's not what I want either. So kind of pretty early on, I'm like, well, didn't really accomplish much. Let's look at the other lanes here. So I scout that major, and then we actually, I believe, trade captains there. And already I'm sort of not even having many pieces in the center, kind of having like an exposed center with my general, my marshal, my colonel there. Same problem I had against Pickett, so definitely something to keep in mind when I'm making setups. I decided I'm going to go ahead and put my general there, just to kind of pretend as if it's like not a very strong piece, kind of be a, hopefully he'll assume it's just like a captain or a lieutenant sitting on the front row. Maybe I can get, that major back at some point with that. But he takes that sergeant out. I go ahead and take that back with my captain. And he thinks about it for a little bit, and he decides he doesn't actually hit it at all. He just, I think, moves some other piece. And I sort of continue what I was doing in the center, but I think more about it. And I reconsider that move on the side once I'm scouted. And I think I end up actually attacking this piece, which I think was definitely a bit of a mistake. I don't think it makes much sense for him to come down with a scout or a bluff piece if he also was coming down with a lieutenant to hit that sergeant. So at least I got that sergeant back. Before we traded majors, because now I'm only down a major, not down anything else, and then I get a lieutenant there, which is really helpful. So now I'm up a lieutenant, down a major. Pretty even. I do have the colonel advantage here. So a fairly even start to this game when it's all said and done. Didn't make the best decisions. I don't think hitting with that major, that captain, was very smart, because I'd already lost a lieutenant to that captain too. I didn't have anything to back up the major with. There's no real credible follow-up. It was just hitting for info. And probably not the best idea to just lose the major like that. Probably a better idea to come up with one of the lieutenants and try to see if I could do something with the sergeant. Trade captains maybe, and then scout, try to do something like that. But we're in an okay spot, pretty even game. Already though, I don't really like my setup. I've got some captains, I've got some lieutenants, but they're kind of buried, and I've got a lot of my power pieces sitting on top of them. And I don't play well when my power pieces are exposed, or especially if they're known, but certainly not exposed either, because I'm worried about them becoming known. You can see there, I feel like I really have no other choice but to kind of advance with this colonel, because it's just sort of sitting there. And he scouts me, so now my information advantage is kind of immediately lost, which is, not very helpful, because the advantage I did have, despite being down that major, was that I did know his colonel on this side. But now we're kind of even on that, in that respect again. But here I'm going to offer a trade of majors. This is the major I had scouted earlier. And he's going to seemingly let me do it, but first he's going to threaten He's going to threaten my colonel, so I'm going to pull that back. I'm wary of this piece. I haven't seen any strength from him yet, but I did see a colonel on this side. I haven't seen anything on this side, even though we did trade majors. So I was thinking, you know, there might be a power piece here at some point. So I consider, okay, I do want to trade these majors. I do want to get these off the board, and it will make it a bit tricky if he threatens my major with his colonel. I guess he technically doesn't know what this major is, so he probably wouldn't do that. But I figure, okay, I'm not going to trade majors yet. I'm not scared of that. It's a scout, so then I'm fine to get his last scout there. But I don't want to trade majors yet, because if I do, then it could free this piece up. I want to scout this, because it's just threatened my colonel. I think it might be good. And so I am unable to bring this scout around, even though this was the scout I was hopefully bluffing as the actual strong piece that was guarding this, you know, sort of bluff, mediocre piece that's actually my general. But I figured it's worth scouting it, and it is worth scouting it, because I find out it's his general, and then I do trade majors, so I'm happy with that. So I found out his general, even though I gave up my info advantage with the colonel that I had earlier. So I'm content with that. I'm feeling decent with my position in this game. I don't like kind of how my pieces are arranged here, but I feel like comfortable with being able to exploit that general, hopefully. And then I get really lucky there in the center, as you just saw, scouting his spy. I think I remembered that as a piece that was somewhere behind the lake. He kind of just brought it behind and kind of just put it there. And I don't know why I figured that it would be a good idea to use my last scout to scout that piece, but I did, and it was a very, very good thing that I did, because that was a really good piece to be able to scout there. You can see I brought up that sergeant and traded those sergeants. That sergeant he had scouted earlier, I'd rather just get that off the board rather than leave it there, and maybe he comes down with a captain or lieutenant later in the game and takes it out. So I was fine to move that sergeant and trade those off. But at this point I know his colonel, and I know his general, and I have his spy. And watching this game back, I really wish that I had taken advantage more of the fact throughout this game, really, that I had his spy. Because you're going to see I really don't do that at all. I think at some points I actually forgot the fact that I had his spy and that his spy was off the board. But I do have it, for whatever that's worth. So I'm looking pretty good in this game. Interesting note here, this captain was actually discovered earlier. In the game, and I kind of brought it up as a sort of bluff to apply pressure, and I don't think I realized that it was discovered, and I don't think he does because of a move that he's going to do shortly to try to figure out the captain as if he doesn't know it. But at this point I figure out, well, rather than bringing out the marshal, maybe I can draw the marshal out if I come up with the spy, and then, you know, perhaps he'll even move next to my spy with his marshal, you know, because his marshal would be needed to defend, and then maybe I can actually take the marshal. So that was my thought process here. My manner of taking advantage of the fact that I have a spy is by moving my spy rather than my marshal. But you'll see there he sort of rediscovers that captain, I do believe, with that minor. Happy to pick up a small piece, so I'm up 2 pieces to being down the major. I also have a spy. I have the info advantage. I think they're looking pretty good at this point. You can see I'm kind of hovering my mouse over this piece. I think at this point I'm thinking this might be the marshal right here. This is the piece I'm kind of pegging, because he hasn't moved any unknown piece into action. I know this is a lieutenant. This is a colonel, and that's his general. That's all that he's moved, up, as far as I can recall. So I'm thinking maybe this is the marshal here, because he hasn't moved anything into action. It's in a pretty central location where he wouldn't need it to move it to have it ready for defense. But I decided at this point I am going to bluff my spy as my marshal. So his general moves over here, kind of threatens these 2 known pieces, colonel, captain. I figure rather than retreating them, I'll actually move my spy over to block his general here. As my chosen method of kind of thwarting that attack. And he has no scouts left, so I'm feeling pretty comfortable, not very threatened by moving my spy around, you know, in the open lanes. But immediately I am thinking at this point, okay, this might be the marshal here. Just kind of considering that, not really sure exactly what to do about that yet. But I do bring this colonel over because if I'm up information, sometimes I do like to trade off the pieces that are known of mine with pieces that I know, or even unknown would be even better. But at least trading off the pieces that are known of mine with the pieces that are known of my opponent, kind of simplifying the board to just be the pieces that I know of my opponent that they don't know of me. But I kind of offer a trade there. I think he moves the colonel back. So he's not willing to take that trade. But then at this point I realize, wait, I can actually 2-square his colonel if I can bring this general around. And you're going to see he sort of realizes the same thing, because then he's going to bring this piece up to block me. And not allow me to come and pressure his colonel here. Which, of course, if I were able to pressure his colonel, I'm already 2-scoring it with my general. I'm going to slow down the game just for this exchange because it's kind of important. So I would be able to trap his colonel here. My thought process here is, well, I was thinking this was the marshal, but then this piece rushed up to stop my... And he doesn't know this is my general, but it seems pretty logical that it would be either my general or my marshal. I'm thinking maybe this one if he's just stopped me. Maybe it's this piece because he's just leaving his lieutenant there, sort of daring me to attack it. And sometimes I feel like when players are being really clever, they'll just leave their marshal, in the less obvious place, even though he's brought up this piece in a big show to stop me from being able to access the lane with his colonel in it. So I was figuring, okay, well, if I come up with this spy and I move next to this piece, if that's his marshal, he's kind of forced to take. He doesn't want to lose his marshal. But also, if he takes it with his marshal, then I can just smash it over here on the right side anyway. But he doesn't do anything. He doesn't move at all. So I'm thinking, considering here what I want to do in response to that, and I figure this is probably not his marshal. The only way this would not have given me any information that I could conclude something based on would be if he had moved this piece away. But the fact that he didn't take the spy, and he doesn't really have a choice to leave it there. So I think the fact that he didn't take the spy with the marshal leads me to think it's probably not the marshal, or move away. So now I think it's not the marshal, the fact that he didn't do anything with it. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is the marshal, it's kind of blocked my colonel. Maybe this is the marshal, it's kind of guarding the lieutenant. Not so much thinking this is the marshal anymore. But I'm not sure which one. I don't want to take a risk. The game's pretty even. I might even have a real slight advantage. I would just say even game. I mean, I've got his spy and 2 smaller pieces to that major. I do know his general, but I think mine's becoming kind of obvious, at least that it's a power piece. So I'd say a pretty even game at this point. I don't want to take a risk, based on that, just something really wild. I just can't bring myself to take that lieutenant and maybe lose the general, or to, especially go for the big reward, the colonel, and maybe just get taken for absolutely nothing. But I'll go ahead and speed the game up again here. The spy, just keep moving it in succession to block the general, and at this point, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to bring up a minor, and I'm going to hit this piece. I'm going to figure out what it is. I figure if it's not the marshal, it's just been kind of sitting there, not moving. It might be a bomb. So I figure I'll come up with a minor to test it out. And just kind of keep the spy in the center, kind of ward his general off. And again, I'm not moving my marshal at all, which I think is a mistake. I think it might have been a smart play to pressure a lot more with my marshal here. Based on me putting my lieutenant here, I think he was also suspicious of this maybe being my marshal, so I could have maybe done some damage without even needing to worry about bringing my general down. If I had moved my marshal up and threatened his colonel there. But I just kind of keep it put. I'm really just looking for any access to that right column there that I might be able to get. And he's going to threaten me then with that piece, and again, I'm not going to take a risk. It's the piece he brought up in a big show to, cut off my, pretty immediately with authority to cut off my general, being able to access his colonel. It doesn't make sense to leave his colonel there if it, could be trapped and isn't able to be defended right now. So I figure, there's probably something to this piece, and if it's not this one, it's got to be this one, because then that lieutenant that was just sitting there for several moves was a trap. And he was sort of daring me to take it, and his marshal would actually be the surprise one that was behind it. So I figure, okay, I'll go ahead and come up. I do want to bring that spy around, keep stopping that general. He is going to actually threaten my general here pretty shortly, but again with this piece, which has me a bit concerned. But then he backs off. Doesn't keep following me. So I'm able to bring that minor up and test that piece. It is a bomb, so not his marshal. So it's a good thing I didn't just hit it with my spy. I think I did pretty strongly consider doing that during the game, hitting it with my spy when I had it sitting here, but I decided to move back instead, thankfully. Then he moves there, and I'll go ahead and slow the game down for this again. He moves between the two, threatens the general. I have to move it away if I think it's the marshal, and then he takes it with his captain, which is pretty frustrating. Because first of all, that means I could have in fact come down and just taken his colonel out with my general, because that means this piece he brought from the corner was a bluff. And also, not only did he bluff me, and not only did I not get this colonel, but then he just sort of went in between my general and my minor. I moved the general away. And then he took my minor, so I'm no longer up a minor. I'm just up that lieutenant now, and nothing else anymore. So that was kind of frustrating, knowing that I could have had a colonel. But not only that, but I also just, was going to have a shot at maybe finding a bomb, maybe trying to go for his flag, or at least open his tripod, because his center was so exposed. And then I lost it to a bluff, his captain. And I think the fact that he moved the captain in between the general and the minor doesn't really tell me anything. Because he could do that with his marshal and then just not take the minor. But he's going to retreat with that piece, and I'm going to follow it. And again, he leaves it there, and I'm like, okay, if that piece wasn't the marshal, this piece is the marshal. This is the marshal. That's what I'm thinking right here. Like, this has got to be the marshal. And I was even telling myself, oh, he's going to move this up and try to bluff me, but I'm not going to believe it. This is the marshal. This right here. And of course, he's leaving the captain there because this is the real marshal. That's the only place it can be guarded. And maybe he's thinking this is my marshal, so he's not worried about his colonel being trapped. He knows he can go in and trade, and his general could counterattack too. So that's why he's letting me just come down with my general. So I moved there. That's not your marshal, I'm thinking, but I'm wrong because obviously that is his marshal. He takes it immediately. And I don't think he actually knew what that general was, but I don't think he even needed to. Whether it was my marshal or my general, it was almost certainly one of the two. He probably even figured it was actually my marshal, because that would make a little more sense to be super bold with your marshal once his spy is gone rather than my general, seeing as I just lost it to his marshal. I think that theory would be borne out. But he didn't even need to know what it was. I think that was a really defensible blind hit with his marshal. So at this point, I'm kind of scrambling a bit. I'm definitely, down material, down the pieces, general and major at this point. I'm not really up anything except one lieutenant and a spy. Definitely not a good situation to be in. That was a pretty big blow to lose my general for basically nothing at all. And at this point, I'm considering like, well, okay, what should I do here? And I'll make note of the fact again that I've failed to move my marshal at all throughout this game, even after getting his spy. I think it's been about 15 minutes of game time since I got his spy, maybe even a little bit more, and I have not moved my marshal one bit. And I'm considering at this point what I should do, and how maybe I can counterattack. I'm just kind of moving with that spy. I'm hoping he moves next to it, because maybe he'll think it's my marshal. I'll go ahead and speed the game up a little bit. But he doesn't bite. He just moves next to the known colonel. Isn't going to go anywhere. He's not going to move next to my spy. In fact, he starts to swing around this lieutenant. I'm like, no, or that's the captain actually, but no, can't let my spy get pressured by that piece because he might hit and I'll just lose the spy. So that's not helpful at all. So at this point, I figure, okay, I'm going to finally move up with the marshal. I'll go ahead and slow it down for this part of the game too, because this is important. So I figure, okay, I'll finally move up with the marshal, especially because his general's way over there. His marshal's somewhat down a little bit in the center. It's not a super defensive position right here. Decide, okay, best thing I can do is move next to his colonel. And I think at this point, I could have maybe thought about the game in this way too. But there's about 21 minutes difference between my buffer, which is left here, and then the game clock. So there's really about 21 minutes of gameplay left. That's a lot of time, but it's not an even game, but it's also a game that might be difficult for him to progress into a win in that 20 minutes time. So I think there might be something to have been said for just maintaining a defensive position the whole time. And you can see me sort of almost contemplating that here, although I don't think I was thinking about the clock intuitively. I don't think I'm actually accustomed enough to like time-based, 1 hour limit tournament play online enough to for that to be my first instinct to think about the time. So I'm really thinking, okay, how can I counterattack and maybe get some pieces back? But I think in hindsight, considering more deeply the aspect of the clock, it might have been a better idea to stay more defensive. But I'm going to move that marshal next to his colonel. He's going to almost immediately hit it, which tells me he thought this was my marshal. So he moved away as if to entice me to follow him. When I initially moved my marshal next to it, but then he took it. And I was encouraged by the fact that he didn't move over, but he moved up, which allowed me to two-square him. So even if I didn't get the colonel, there might have been a chance to chase back and get some of the other pieces here. But at any rate, I do gain his colonel there. And then at this point, I'm also considering, okay, what should my next move be? Should I advance further, try to pressure these pieces, or should I fall back and retreat a bit? And I think considering what I mentioned earlier about the difference between the game time and my buffer clock, I think the right move in hindsight is definitely to just keep my marshal here, stay put, be able to defend, because I can't defend these pieces. I can move my colonel over, then his general would move down. I would move my marshal over 1, 2, 3 in response to his general moving over 1, 2, 3. So I would have enough spaces to block his general. I'd be able to move my marshal here in response to his general moving here, and I could just simply move my marshal next to these two pieces to guard them. So I'd be able to defend everything, and I think given the amount of time that was left on the game, especially now that I've gained that colonel, so his major and his general just don't have free reign if we happen to trade marshals, I think that's the best play. And yeah, my spy will be exposed, and yeah, eventually we'll trade marshals, but it just will it'll force him to take a lot more time to progress the game, and he might run out of time perhaps. But I do think about that a lot, whether I should defend or whether I should sort of progress forward with my marshal, try to counterattack. I do consider the fact I'll definitely lose the spy, maybe the captain or this lieutenant if I do end up being aggressive. I'll go ahead and speed the game back up. And you can see I make my decision here. I do think about it for quite a while. And I end up deciding, you'll see I'll move my marshal forward here, up. And again, I don't think that's probably the right decision in hindsight, even based on like the immediate consequences of what happens when I do that, regardless of like clock considerations. But I go ahead and bring my colonel up, and I think this was a bit of an inaccuracy on my part. I probably should have kept moving up with the captain, forced him to reveal another piece instead of allowing it to be trapped again. But at any rate, I'm going to continue on this side with my pieces, he's going to continue on this side with the middle, and this is why I don't think it was a good idea, because the game's now like being progressed a lot. We're sort of both attacking in each other's territory, both eliminating pieces. And that definitely helps the person who wants a resolution on the game to be reached before a certain amount of time is up on the clock. So I'm sort of helping him progress the game for him. But then you're going to see it maybe wasn't even such a good idea to progress at all, because I'm going to lose a captain and my spy, and all I gained was a lieutenant. So I kind of realized that, but I also realized, okay, the center is open now. So I go ahead and I come up with this minor. So I have lost that captain, which is a bit problematic, because now I'm down 3 pieces. I am up the colonel, but that's not too helpful. But I am able to kind of get my, I consider whether I should let him trade marshals, but I figured no, because if I move down, I can force that piece to move, so I kind of gain tempo that way. I can still move my minor down unobstructed. But at this point, I realize I can avoid the trade and also, test these pieces over here, which I do, but it's just a minor, so I ultimately didn't really gain anything. And at this point, I realize, okay, I'm down a general, a major, and a captain, just for that colonel. I need a lotto. I need to find something. I need to gain one of those 3 pieces back, that general, that major, or that captain. Captain I had just lost down here that I wasn't able to trap and gain in this piece. So I figure, okay, probably tripod here is my thought process. Probably some bomb over here. 2 bombs throughout the rest of this. Where might they be? Trying to figure out where best to take my lotto chances. So you'll see my choice here. I end up lottoing that piece, and it was a really good result. It was a captain, which is the lowest of the the major or the captain or the colonel technically that I could have gained, but definitely I'll still take it. Game's kind of salvageable again in a sense after I gain that, because those 2 lieutenants are useful now to me. They can't just be trapped by his captain and his major, and I'm going to make sure I stay up those 2 lieutenants, at least for a little while longer, by saving that lieutenant, not allowing it to be trapped in these bombs over here if his marshal and general were to come down. So I'm able to escape that lieutenant up to the center, and he's pressuring my colonel there, and I do realize I'm going to have to bring my marshal in position to save the colonel, not let the colonel be trapped. But I'm okay with trading marshals at this point, so I don't mind just sort of moving it in position like I do right there to cut the general off. He could move up with his marshal and trade if he wanted. That'd be fine with me. Not really avoidable. I am up that colonel, and I got that captain back, which is helpful. But he doesn't want to trade marshals either. And I actually lotto here, based on the assumption this might be his flag. I hit this piece, and I got really lucky. It's a minor. And I do think it'd be better here to allow my lieutenant to be killed by a colonel or a major, make him reveal something rather than hitting that bomb like I did. But it's not the biggest deal. I guess I sort of transferred being up 2 lieutenants to being up a minor and a lieutenant. But I think a bit of an inaccuracy there. Better to make him reveal something to trap the lieutenant rather than just hitting it on a bomb that I had already assumed, because I thought this was his flag. So I take that as confirmation. That's probably his flag here. There's no other closed position. I come up with that colonel, and in exchange he comes up for this piece that was right here. So I'm like, okay, well that's probably his colonel. I actually could have lottoed that with my marshal, which made me a little bit like, ah, man, I was just like 1 space off of really getting the jackpot there. The best piece I could have gotten, but it's okay. I can only be so lucky. I already got a captain. Can't ask for too much more than that. So I figure based on the way he moved this up, that's going to be his colonel. So my job now is to find his major if I can. But I'd also like to trade captains, which is this piece right here. And I'm thinking I kind of hover over this piece. I'm wary of this. I think this might be a major. Just feel like there's a possibility of it sitting right there. Maybe it could be a major. So I do want to I think, yeah, I do want to, be wary of not allowing my captain to be trapped, up against the lake by like this colonel and his major there too. But at this point, he kind of lets my colonel in and my captain in. So I'm thinking of how I can, take advantage of that because I've got this captain here that I wanted to trade, but in fact, he just hits my colonel. So now I feel really good about that. So like I'm actually up a captain rather than being down one. And additionally, I think I realize at this point that this piece I can, oh, not quite yet. It'll be in pretty short order when actually he's going to make a move that's going to allow me to trap this piece as well. Or maybe even with the captain, I am able to trap it regardless. Yeah, right here, he sort of cuts off access for his piece, and he allows my colonel to move over in that way, and that lets me basically trap this piece. And even if he had moved over to stop it, I could have traded colonels, moved over with this colonel, traded marshals, and I would have had this piece too. So it was actually trapped in regardless, and the fact that he traded there actually just made it a little bit easier for me to trap this piece. But I realized I'm going to get this piece too, so I'm actually looking pretty good at this point in the game. He does make me reveal my captain for that, which is fine. And I figure trapping the general or just trading the marshals is roughly the same. Trading the marshals is probably actually smarter, because if I moved over to trap his general, his marshal could cause problems just for these two pieces in the center a lot quicker than his general would be able to. But at this point, I'm up a captain, I'm up a lieutenant, I'm up a minor, and I'm up a sergeant. So I'm up 4 pieces in exchange for being down the general and the major and being up the colonel. But here I do make a bit of a mistake. I realized that, okay, I've kind of misjudged this. I was so sure this was his flag that I was just going to come up with a minor no matter what, and surely he would have to do something desperate to stop me. I'm going to slow the game down. Probably should have done that earlier. But then as I come up, he makes no move to try to stop me, like, whatsoever, which confused me and made me think maybe his flag wasn't just here sitting in a tripod. And then right there, that move sold it. If he was worried about that, he would have moved his general right here to stop my minor from just having free reign to go to his flag. But instead he moved up, which just showed me, like, okay, this is not his flag. But also, what else can I do? I've got this minor sitting there at the only closed flag location that's left. So I think about this for a while, whether I want to, trade or hit. And I figure if I hit this piece and it's, like, not a bomb, or like, if I hit this piece and I just lose my minor, his marshal could actually come over here and just be annoying with my colonel. Like, he could move his general over, I'd have to move my colonel over, retreat. He can kind of run his marshal back and forth. So I think here that I actually initiate the trade, because there's no way he can stop me from hitting this piece. But then there we see the end result. He actually just takes it because it's not his flag at all. It's not his flag at all, which is why he was not at all concerned when I came up with this minor. And I was so hasty to bring up the minor that I didn't even consider the fact that my colonel and captain were just sitting there and he would be able to take one with his general. So I lost a captain and I lost a minor in that, which is not good. So now I'm only up the sergeant and the lieutenant, while I'm down the major and the general, and I'm up the colonel. So I'm technically up 3 pieces and down 2 pieces. But my flag's pretty obvious. I have no idea where his flag is. And his major's got pretty free reign over the board here. It's looking a bit tricky for me. Definitely possible if I apply the right pressure, maybe get lucky with respect to his flag. But I'll go ahead and speed the game up again. I figure I need to probably block off the right side. I don't want him to be able to bring a minor down there. But I think I realized a little bit too late in this game that he has like 1 sergeant left. I think I was thinking that I wanted to not move these minors so as to not make my flag obvious, but I think I really just needed to, because he had only 1 sergeant left. I think it was really necessary that I move up with minors sooner, because either we trade or I find like his 1 moving piece left, and that's a risk I probably needed to take at this point in the game. But at this point, I'm assuming that's a minor, and so I'm kind of keeping that sergeant in the middle to defend somewhat. And I realized at this point, okay, like I just need to attack with my minor. I don't really have any other choice here. I think this is a situation where my setup really damaged my gameplay here, because ideally I would have had a piece on this right side to stop the minors from coming down at all. But as it stands, I couldn't. As it stands, the bombs are actually hindrance because they allowed his minor to come down unobstructed. And actually kind of basically gaining a sort of like access point through the right side, whereas I would have rather had a piece here to stop that in the lane. I wasn't able to. So he's going to come down here and kind of force my sergeant out with his his 2 power pieces here. And And you can see he's very clearly making like a way down for his minor. And I realized at this point, okay, I'm still thinking his flag's probably over here, because I feel like a lot of our gameplay, a lot of his strong pieces, his marshal spawned here. Flag's probably over here is my thought process. So I'm trying to see if I have enough moves to get my minor over to the side quickly enough. And I realized pretty quickly I don't have nearly as many moves as I thought. But I take that bomb out. Not what I was looking for. I'll go and slow the game down because we're nearing to the end. Figure, okay, I'm gonna go for this side. I don't think it's over here. We haven't paid attention to this at any point during the game, so I'm gonna go for this side. And I move my lieutenant up to just make him use a few extra moves to be able to get his minor to the flag. So I'm trying to figure out, count the spaces, and I think I realize at this point that I don't have enough spaces to like check all 4 of these pieces. Even if they were all bombs, even if there was nothing there to stop my minor, because he does have a minor and a sergeant left. But I don't think I have enough moves to check all of them unless they're like all bombs. So I don't think I can afford to like go to a certain point, lose the minor, and then also have enough spaces to like check this with my colonel, for example, because of how close his minor is. So I'm kind of thinking over that, mulling that a bit. Realizing that I'm going to have to sort of make a guess, but I've sort of approached from the left side. I've already kind of dug my own grave in a sense that I'm going to be able to check what I'm going to be able to check, and that's about it. So I take that piece out. It's a bomb, so that's, again, not quite what I'm looking for, but not entirely unexpected, because he was never concerned about me taking that piece. Then I hit that. It's a sergeant. At this point, his minor is really close to being able to come down and take my flag. He's just got to move that out of the way and bring his minor in. So I realize I'm going to be able to hit this sergeant and then hit this piece. And I'm just going to have to pray and hope this is the flag. Because that's the only piece I'm going to be able to reach. I can't hit both of them. So he takes that bomb out, and then I hit that, and it's a bomb. It is not his flag, and then he takes my flag for the win. So I actually asked him in the chat. I was really curious where his flag was. I asked him if it was the one next over, if it was this one, because that's right behind where his marshal spawns. So was it the one next over, or was it on his left side? And I think he ended up answering that it was on my left side, his right, but I don't remember exactly. I think I clarified with him later on, and I think I remember being left with the impression that it was over here, but I could be wrong about that. But I think watching this back, this is a very sort of tumultuous game. Definitely a bit of a roller coaster of a game. Even as late as his captain hitting my colonel and then me trapping that sergeant and taking that sergeant with my captain, I felt really good about my chances in this game. And then I think just being a little bit too confident about where I thought his flag should be. I figured it would just be this tripod here, coming up with that minor and then losing the minor and the captain. That's a captain that would have really come in handy, because it would have already been in his territory. It could have, maybe guarded this lane rather than me have to drag a piece out from over here and bring it around the bombs, which I wasn't able to do. Another piece to, check, try to find the open flag. So, evidently it was open. But losing those 2 pieces was not helpful, and then he had a much better position after that. But definitely a bit of a roller coaster of a game. I think I didn't make too many clear mistakes other than simply losing the general, which was pretty bad. That was just something I couldn't afford to do, and that was definitely an unnecessary risk on my part. But I didn't do too much bad, but I also didn't do too much good. I just kind of sat around a lot in this game. An example of that being like just moving my spy a bunch in the mid game without any real purpose, just kind of like warding his general off, trying to like build kind of clout for that marshal bluff. Not moving my marshal at all when I probably should have. So I think some lessons to be learned here. I think also the setup just didn't really help me in this game at all. But so this loss dropped me to 4-1 in the tournament, which was fine. I was still in a tie with I think 2 or 3 other players for the lead in the group, which was a good place to be in. But definitely Nemesis played well, and kudos to him for winning. And so this will bring me, next video will be the round 6 game. There were 2 more games in the group stage of this tournament, and then we progressed to the knockout stage. But that's where I'll leave it for this game. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.